What would you do if you discovered something impossible buried 40 feet beneath an ancient forest? Tonight on Black Fears, we're bringing you 8 disturbing true stories from the Pacific Northwest wilderness, where isolated mountains and endless woods conceal horrors beyond explanation. These accounts have been shared anonymously to protect those involved, but every story you're about to hear actually happened. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location and the time in the comments below. If you're brave enough to continue, let's dive in. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real horror stories. My name is Jamie, and I'm a geological surveyor for the USGS. Back in August 2019, I found myself deep in Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon, conducting what I thought would be a routine mineral composition survey. I'd done dozens of these assignments before, trudging through remote wilderness with my ground-penetrating radar equipment, mapping the hidden world beneath our feet. I was comfortable with solitude, with the weight of my gear, with the endless stretches of Douglas fir and western hemlock. But what I discovered near Ramona Falls Trail changed everything. I thought I understood about the earth beneath us. The first 2 days went exactly as expected. I set up my base camp in a small clearing, ran my initial scans, and started building a comprehensive underground map of the area. The work was methodical, almost meditative. I'd plant the radar array, watch the data stream across my laptop screen, document the readings, then move to the next grid point. Layers of sediment, pockets of groundwater, occasional mineral deposits, all exactly what the textbooks predicted. I remember feeling satisfied with the progress, thinking I'd wrap up early and maybe spend an extra day fishing before heading back to Portland. Then, on the morning of day 3, everything shifted. I was running a deep scan at a site about 2 miles from the main trail when my equipment picked up something that made absolutely no sense. 40 feet underground, the radar showed a perfectly spherical void. Not a cave, not a pocket of trapped air, a geometrically perfect sphere, roughly 20 feet in diameter. My first instinct was equipment failure. I'd seen glitches before, strange artifacts that appeared in the data when moisture got into the electronics or when the ground composition created interference. But when I recalibrated everything and ran the scan again, the void was still there. Same size, same depth, same impossible perfection. I spent the next hour running scans from different angles, trying to find a rational explanation. Natural geological formations don't create perfect spheres. Water erosion produces irregular cavities. Lava tubes have elongated, asymmetric shapes. But this thing, whatever it was, showed up as flawlessly round from every direction I scanned. The data was consistent, undeniable, and completely impossible according to everything I'd learned in my geology degree and 7 years in the field. That's when I started noticing the other changes. Subtle at first, easy to dismiss as fatigue or the effects of too much time alone in the woods. The afternoon light filtering through the canopy seemed wrong somehow, like the color spectrum had shifted just slightly off from what my brain expected. Greens looked too vivid, almost luminescent. Shadows fell at angles that didn't quite match the sun's position. When I looked directly at something, it appeared normal, but in my peripheral vision, the forest seemed to ripple and distort like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the work, but that night, lying in my tent, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw after images of impossible geometry. Shapes that seemed to have more dimensions than should exist, angles that bent in directions my mind couldn't quite process. And beneath it all, I felt something. Not heard, exactly. Felt. A deep sub-bass rumble that vibrated through the ground and up through my sleeping pad, resonating in my chest cavity. It reminded me of standing too close to a massive subwoofer, except there was no sound, just the physical sensation of something enormous pulsing beneath me. The next morning, I returned to the anomaly site with fresh equipment, determined to gather more data. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. As I set up the radar array, I noticed the complete absence of normal forest sounds. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Just an oppressive, unnatural silence that pressed against my eardrums. Even the wind seemed to avoid this particular patch of forest, leaving the air perfectly still. That's when the metallic taste started. It began as a faint sensation, like I'd touched my tongue to a battery terminal. But as I worked closer to the site, it intensified, spreading through my mouth until everything tasted of copper and ozone. My tongue felt numb, almost paralyzed. I tried drinking water, eating an energy bar, anything to wash the taste away, but nothing helped. The radar readings from that morning were even stranger than before. The void had moved, not much, maybe 3 feet from its previous position, but it had definitely shifted. And the new scans showed something else, a faint pattern of electromagnetic activity emanating from the sphere in regular pulses. When I routed the signal through my audio equipment, trying to get some sense of the frequency, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The pulses matched my heartbeat. Exactly. Beat for beat, the thing underground was somehow synchronizing with my cardiac rhythm. I stood there, headphones on, listening to this impossible feedback loop, my heart triggering a response 40 feet underground. Or maybe the underground signal controlling my heart, I couldn't tell which. The boundary between cause and effect seemed to dissolve. Time felt elastic, stretched and compressed simultaneously. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed, but it felt like maybe 10 minutes. Or maybe it felt like days. My sense of duration had completely fragmented. That afternoon, I tried to leave, packed up my gear, broke down my base camp, started hiking back toward the trailhead. But with every step away from the anomaly, I felt an increasing sense of wrongness, like I was walking in the wrong direction through a one-way door. My internal compass, that instinctive sense of direction that every experienced outdoorsman develops, kept insisting I should turn around. The forest looked different too, unfamiliar, despite having hiked this same route dozens of times over the past few days. Trees I didn't remember seeing, clearings that weren't on my map. I made it about half a mile before I gave up and returned to the site. As soon as I did, that sense of wrongness evaporated, replaced by an unsettling feeling of rightness, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. That terrified me more than anything else, the idea that something was manipulating my perception, guiding my choices, keeping me close. The final straw came the next morning. I woke up disoriented, my sleeping bag soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain air. When I emerged from my tent, I saw them, my own boot prints, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around the anomaly site. Not a random wandering path, a precise mathematical spiral that I absolutely had not walked. I'd been asleep all night, or thought I had been. But there they were, dozens of footprints in the soft earth, each one clearly from my boots, right down to the distinctive tread pattern and the small rock stuck in the left heel. I stood at the edge of that spiral, staring at the impossible evidence of my own sleepwalking, or something worse. The prints led from my tent, circled the anomaly site in tightening loops, then returned to my tent. But I had no memory of it. No sense of lost time. Just 8 hours of what I thought was dreamless sleep. That's when I understood. Whatever was down there, it wasn't just passive. It was aware. It was watching. And it had reached up through 40 feet of rock and soil to touch my mind, to move my body, to demonstrate its presence in a way I couldn't deny or rationalize away. I grabbed only what I could carry and ran, not a methodical pack-up, not a careful retreat. I ran like my life depended on it, crashing through underbrush, ignoring the trail, just putting distance between myself and that thing. The whole way out, I felt it watching me. Not with eyes, but with something else, something vast and patient, and utterly inhuman. The weight of its attention pressed against my back, making my skin crawl and my pulse race. I made it to my truck and drove straight through to Portland, not stopping except for gas. Filed my report with the USGS, tried to explain what I'd found, but how do you write a professional geological assessment of something impossible? They chalked it up to equipment malfunction and stress, offered me time off, suggested I talk to someone. But here's the thing, it didn't end when I left the forest. Even now, 6 years later, I still feel it sometimes. In moments of complete silence, that sub-bass vibration returns, thrumming through my bones. I'll be sitting in my apartment. No sound except maybe the hum of the refrigerator, and suddenly I'll feel it. That same pulse, that same rhythm, syncing with my heartbeat. And I know, with absolute certainty, that whatever's buried beneath Mount Hood is still aware of me. Still watching, still connected somehow, across all those miles. I've tried to go back. 3 times I've driven to the forest, thinking maybe if I returned with better equipment, with more preparation, I could understand what I encountered. But each time, I can't make myself turn onto the access road. My hands start shaking. That metallic taste floods my mouth, and my vision starts distorting at the edges. My body knows something my conscious mind doesn't want to accept. I'm not supposed to go back there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sometimes I wonder if I actually left at all, or if some part of me is still there, walking that spiral, trying to understand something too large for human comprehension. The Jamie who drove away might just be an echo, a shadow cast by whatever woke up beneath Mount Hood that August. And if that's true, if I'm already gone in the ways that matter, then what am I now? Have you ever felt watched by something you couldn't see? Something that knew you better than you knew yourself? My name is Victoria, and I spent the summer of 1998 as a fire lookout at Desolation Peak in Washington's North Cascades. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a forestry degree, and desperate for solitude after 4 years of crowded dorm rooms and constant noise. The job seemed perfect. 2 months alone in a mountaintop tower, watching for smoke, reading books, living simply. The Forest Service recruiter warned me about the isolation, asked if I was sure I could handle it. I laughed and said isolation was exactly what I wanted. I had no idea what I was really signing up for. The helicopter dropped me off on a brilliant July morning, the kind of day that makes you understand why people fall in love with the wilderness. My tower sat at 7,600 feet, a small glass-walled cabin perched on wooden stilts, surrounded by nothing but peaks and sky and endless forest. The pilot helped me unload my supplies, gave me a quick radio check, and then I was alone. Truly, completely alone in a way I'd never experienced. The silence felt almost sacred. For the first week, everything was exactly what I'd hoped for. I fell into a peaceful routine, wake at dawn, scan the horizons with binoculars, log weather conditions, read, write in my journal, watch the light change across the mountains. At night, the stars were so bright they cast shadows. I never felt so content, so at peace with myself. The tower became my entire world, and I loved every square foot of it. Then I found the previous lookout's logbook. It wasn't the official record. That had been collected at the end of the last season. This was a personal journal shoved behind a loose board near the propane stove. I almost didn't pull it out, but curiosity won. The entries started normal enough. Weather observations, wildlife sightings, philosophical musings about solitude. But around week 5 of the previous summer, the tone shifted. The lookout, whose name I never found, started writing about feeling watched. About noticing small things out of place each morning, about a growing conviction that someone visited the tower while they slept. I told myself it was just isolation getting to them, the kind of thing that happens when you're alone too long. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and when I woke up the next morning, my binoculars were pointing in the wrong direction. I distinctly remembered leaving them aimed northeast toward a valley I'd been monitoring. Now they face south, focused on my own supply cache 200 feet below the tower. I stood there, staring at them, trying to remember if I'd moved them and forgotten. But I knew I hadn't. I was meticulous about my routines, careful about everything in that small space. Over the next few days, it kept happening. Small displacements. My radio moved from the desk to the windowsill. Books reshelved in different order. Coffee mug turned upside down. Each incident minor enough to dismiss, but accumulating into a pattern that made my skin crawl. I started taking photographs of the tower before bed, documenting exactly where everything sat, and comparing them to the morning after. The photographs confirmed it. Things were moving while I slept. The rational part of my brain insisted I was doing it myself. Sleepwalking maybe, moving things unconsciously. But I had no history of sleepwalking, and the movements felt deliberate, purposeful, like someone methodically rearranging my space. I set up small tests, a thread across the door, flour dusted on the floor near my bed, a stack of coins balanced on the edge of the desk. Every morning, evidence of disturbance, thread broken, footprints in the flour that matched my own boots. Coins scattered. I was catching myself. Somehow, some part of me was waking up and moving around the tower without any conscious awareness. The realization terrified me more than if it had been an intruder. At least an intruder I could understand, could defend against. But how do you defend yourself from yourself? Sleep became impossible. I'd lie there, rigid with tension, trying to stay awake, trying to catch myself in the act, but exhaustion always won, dragging me under into black, dreamless stretches that felt more like erasure than rest. And every morning, more evidence, more proof that I was doing things I couldn't remember. By week 4, I was unraveling. My logs became erratic. I stopped eating regularly, surviving on coffee and crackers. The mirror showed a stranger, hollow eyes, unwashed hair, a twitchy vigilance that made me look feral. I knew I should call for an early extraction, admit I couldn't handle the isolation, but pride stopped me. I'd been so confident, so sure of my ability to handle solitude. Admitting failure felt unbearable. Then the radio incident happened. I woke one night to the sound of static, that particular hiss of a dead frequency. The radio was on, tuned to a channel we never used, volume turned up high. I stumbled out of bed, disoriented, reaching to turn it off. But before I could, I heard my own voice emerge from the static. Not a recording. My voice speaking in real time, saying words I wasn't speaking. "Victoria," it said, my own voice addressing me. "You need to leave before it happens again." I yanked the power cord from the wall, plunging the tower into silence. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I checked everywhere, every corner of that tiny space, looking for hidden speakers, for any rational explanation. Nothing. Just me and the darkness, and the impossible memory of my own voice, warning me about something I didn't understand. The next morning, I radioed base camp. Tried to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. The supervisor listened patiently, then suggested I might be experiencing altitude sickness, or maybe the stress of isolation. She offered to send someone up to check on me, but also reminded me that false alarms were taken seriously, that I'd signed a contract. I heard the unspoken message, stick it out or lose the job and the reference, so I stayed. But I changed strategies. Instead of fighting the sleepwalking, I started documenting it. Set up my camera on a timer, taking photos every 30 minutes through the night. And what I captured made everything worse. Photo after photo showed me moving through the tower, but my movements were wrong, too fluid, too purposeful. My face in the images looked awake, alert, but I had no memory of any of it. In one photo, I stood at the window, staring out at the darkness. In the next, I was at my desk, writing something. In another, I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, arms at my sides, head tilted at an unnatural angle. I reviewed the writing I'd done during these blackout periods. pages and pages of the same sentence, repeated over and over in my handwriting. The tower watches the watcher. Hundreds of repetitions, filling an entire notebook. I didn't remember writing any of it. That's when I started wondering if the previous lookout had left that journal deliberately, as a warning. If maybe something about this particular tower, this particular place, did something to people, made them fracture, split, become two versions of themselves, the waking one and the sleeping one, increasingly disconnected. I lasted 2 more weeks, though calling it lasting feels generous. I existed in a state of perpetual exhaustion and low-grade terror, never sure which version of myself I'd wake up as. The line between my conscious and unconscious mind felt dangerously thin, like paper worn transparent. I caught myself having conversations I didn't remember starting, found bruises I couldn't explain, noticed my reflection seeming to move a half-second out of sync with my actual movements. The breaking point came during a thunderstorm. I was scanning the horizon for lightning strikes when the radio crackled to life, even though it wasn't plugged in. My voice again, but different this time, not warning me, pleading with me. "Victoria, can you hear me? I've been trying to reach you. I'm still here. I'm stuck in the tower. Please, you have to remember what happened." I ran, didn't pack, didn't call it in, just grabbed my emergency kit and fled down the trail in a storm, 7 miles to the nearest road. Got picked up by a ranger who found me delirious and hypothermic, babbling about voices and towers and losing myself. They helicoptered me out, put me through medical evaluation, psychiatric assessment. Everything came back normal. No psychotic break, no physiological explanation, just extreme stress and isolation effects, they said. But here's what I never told them. Before I ran, before I left the tower, I looked back one last time, and I saw someone in the window watching me go. Someone who looked exactly like me, wearing the same clothes, with the same desperate expression. We locked eyes for just a moment before the storm obscured the view. I don't know if I saw my reflection in the glass, or if some part of me really did stay behind. I never went back to fire lookout work. Couldn't. But sometimes, late at night in my apartment, I hear static from electronics that aren't turned on, and occasionally I catch my reflection moving just slightly wrong, like it's trying to tell me something I'm not ready to hear. The tower took something from me that summer, or maybe it gave me something I didn't want. Either way, I'm not the same person who climbed up there full of confidence and dreams of solitude. The previous lookout's journal ended with one final entry I didn't mention before. If you're reading this, you're already splitting. The tower doesn't like to be alone. Do you ever feel like you're living 2 lives at once, and you're not sure which one is really you? My name is Philip, and I've been a professional mycologist for nearly 15 years. I specialize in rare fungi, spending most of my time documenting species distribution across the Pacific Northwest. It's solitary work, the kind that requires patience and an eye for detail most people don't have. In October 2014, I was tracking a particularly elusive mushroom species through Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington, not far from Spirit Lake. What I found there wasn't just a new specimen. It was something that fundamentally altered my understanding of what's possible in these ancient woods. The morning started unremarkably. I'd parked at a trailhead and hiked about 3 miles into a section of old-growth forest that sees maybe a dozen visitors a year. The air smelled of wet earth and decomposing leaves, that rich autumn scent that every forager loves. I was following a drainage where moisture collected, prime territory for the fungi I was after. My field bag was packed with specimen jars, my camera, pH testing equipment, and enough supplies for a full day of work. Around noon, I noticed something unusual. The mushrooms I'd been tracking formed a nearly perfect ring, maybe 30 feet in diameter, growing in a pattern too precise to be natural distribution. Fairy rings aren't uncommon, but this was different. The spacing was mathematical, exact, and the ring encircled a grove of massive cedars that had to be centuries old. The trees themselves bore markings I didn't immediately recognize, carved symbols, weathered by time but still clearly deliberate. Not modern graffiti. These looked ancient, cut deep into the bark decades, or maybe centuries ago. I documented everything methodically, taking photographs from multiple angles, collecting samples, making notes about the species composition. That's when I heard them. Voices speaking in a rhythm that sounded almost like chanting. I looked up from my work and saw them through the trees. A group of people, maybe 7 or 8, dressed in clothing that looked completely out of place. Long wool coats, wide-brimmed hats, the kind of garments you'd see in photographs from the early 1900s. They moved in a slow circle around another ring of mushrooms I hadn't noticed yet, placing objects I couldn't quite see among the fungi. My first thought was reenactors, some historical society doing a period demonstration, but we were miles from any trail, in terrain that required serious hiking to access, and something about the way they moved felt wrong. Too smooth, too synchronized, like they were following choreography they'd performed 1,000 times. I called out, identified myself as a researcher, but they didn't acknowledge me, just kept their circular procession, voices rising and falling in that strange cadence. I pulled out my phone to photograph them. The moment I raised the camera, they vanished. Not ran away, not ducked behind trees. They simply weren't there anymore, like someone had flipped a switch. The forest fell absolutely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling leaves. Just complete, suffocating quiet that pressed against my eardrums. I stood frozen, trying to process what I'd seen. Then I noticed the mushroom ring they'd been circling was still there, and at its center lay something that made my blood turn cold. A human tooth. Freshly extracted, still bloody at the root. I'm trained in field identification, and I know human dentition when I see it. It was a molar, upper right quadrant, with a gold filling that glinted in the filtered sunlight. My hands shook as I radioed the ranger station. Told them I'd found possible human remains, gave them my coordinates. They said someone would hike out, but it would take a few hours. I should have left then, should have walked back to the trailhead and waited there. But something kept me rooted to that spot. A sick compulsion to understand what I was looking at. That's when I saw my driver's license. Right there, in the center of the mushroom ring, next to the tooth. My actual license, with my photo and information, the one that should have been in my wallet. I checked my bag frantically, dumped everything out. My wallet was there, but the license slot was empty. There was no rational way it could have gotten from my wallet to the center of that ring without me noticing, unless I'd placed it there myself, unless I'd participated in whatever ritual those people, those apparitions, had been performing. The smell hit me then, sweet rot mixing with something else, something that reminded me of incense but older, earthier. The mushrooms around me seemed to pulse slightly, their caps expanding and contracting in unison. I've studied fungi my entire career, and I've never seen anything like it. Bioluminescence, sure, chemical reactions to stimuli, but not this coordinated movement, this almost respiratory rhythm. I grabbed my license and ran, crashed through underbrush, tore my jacket on branches, didn't stop until I reached my truck. The rangers found me there an hour later, shaking and incoherent. I led them back to the site, showed them exactly where I'd been. The tooth was gone. The mushroom ring remained, but there was no evidence of any people, no trace of the symbols I'd photographed. They searched the area thoroughly, found nothing unusual, just an ordinary patch of old growth forest with a fairly common fungal growth pattern. But my photographs told a different story. The images of the people showed only blank spots, white voids where their figures should have been. The carved symbols on the trees appeared in the photos, but looked even older than I'd thought, weathered to the point of being almost unrecognizable. and my camera had captured something I hadn't seen with my own eyes. The mushrooms glowing faintly in several shots, emitting a light that shouldn't have been visible in daylight conditions. I tried to put it behind me, filed my report, submitted my samples to the lab, went back to other research projects. But 3 weeks later, I woke up to find mushrooms growing in my backyard. The same species from that forest ring, growing in the same precise circular pattern. I'd lived in that house for 8 years, and nothing like that had ever appeared. I tried removing them, pulled them up, poisoned the soil, even had a landscaping company dig out 2 feet of earth and replace it with fresh topsoil. Within a week, they were back. Same circle, same species, same impossible growth rate. My neighbor mentioned seeing me in the backyard at odd hours, standing in the center of the mushroom ring. I had no memory of it. Started setting my phone to record video while I slept, and sure enough, there I was. Walking out to the backyard around 3 in the morning, standing motionless in the circle for exactly 27 minutes, then returning to bed. All while completely asleep, or at least with no conscious awareness. I consulted doctors, sleep specialists, even a psychiatrist. Everyone had theories: parasomnia, stress-induced episodes, environmental toxins affecting my brain chemistry. But none of their treatments worked. The mushrooms kept growing. I kept walking out to them in my sleep, and slowly I began to understand that I wasn't trying to get rid of them. I was maintaining them. The realization came gradually. I'd find small offerings in the circle that I didn't remember placing. A penny here, a flower there, food that attracted animals but never seemed to get eaten. I was performing some kind of upkeep, some ritual maintenance that I only understood on an unconscious level. The part of me that walked out there at night knew exactly what needed to be done, even if my waking mind remained clueless. I've learned to live with it. What choice do I have? The mushrooms are permanent residents now, and I'm their unwilling caretaker. I've stopped fighting it, stopped trying to understand through scientific frameworks that clearly don't apply. Some things exist outside our ability to categorize and explain. Some agreements get made in forests older than our civilization, and once you've stumbled into them, there's no backing out. The worst part isn't the sleepwalking or the mushrooms or even the lost time. It's the knowledge that I'm maintaining something, keeping something contained or appeased or fed. I don't know which. The mushrooms grow, I tend them, and whatever I encountered in that forest stays quiet. But I feel it watching sometimes, patient and ancient, waiting to see if I'll forget my obligations. And I know with absolute certainty that forgetting would be catastrophic in ways I can't begin to imagine. Last month, I found another tooth in the circle. Not mine, someone else's. And I don't want to think about what that means. Have you ever agreed to something you don't remember, only to spend the rest of your life living with the consequences? My name is Hannah, and I've been running ultramarathons for the past 6 years. I test gear for outdoor companies, which means I spend a lot of time on trails most people never see. In March 2023, I was doing a solo training run on the Eagle Creek Trail in Oregon's Columbia River Gorge. It's a route I'd completed dozens of times, familiar enough that I could run it in my sleep. That morning, I encountered something that turned a routine workout into the most terrifying experience of my life. I started at dawn, the way I always do. The trail was mine alone at that hour, mist still clinging to the gorge walls. Everything quiet except for my breathing and the rhythmic sound of my shoes hitting packed dirt. I was testing a new hydration system and a pair of shoes that were supposed to improve stability on technical terrain. The first 3 miles felt perfect. My legs were loose, my pace steady, and I was settling into that meditative state runner's chase. Then I heard footsteps behind me, another runner, matching my pace almost exactly. I glanced back and saw a man about 30 yards behind, dressed in gear similar to mine, running jacket, trail shoes, a hydration vest. Nothing unusual about encountering another early morning runner, even on a weekday. I gave a quick wave and picked up my speed slightly, Not trying to race, but just maintaining my training pace. He accelerated too, still 30 yards back, neither gaining nor falling behind. I ran another mile, varying my speed, slowing for a technical section, then pushing hard on a flat stretch. He mirrored every change perfectly, maintaining that exact distance. I stopped at a viewpoint, pretending to check my watch and adjust my gear. He stopped too, standing motionless on the trail behind me, not stretching or drinking water, or doing anything a normal runner would do during a break, just standing there, facing my direction. A chill crawled up my spine despite the exertion. I called out, asking if he was okay, if he needed anything. No response. He didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. I could see him clearly now in the growing light. Average height, dark running clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. But there was something off about his posture, something I couldn't quite identify that made my instincts scream danger. I started running again, faster now, pushing beyond my planned training pace. My heart rate spiked, and it wasn't from the physical effort. It was fear, pure and primal. The footsteps behind me resumed instantly, maintaining that same 30-yard gap. I tried varying my pace dramatically, sprinting for 100 yards, then slowing to a walk, then sprinting again. He matched it all perfectly, like he was tethered to me by an invisible rope. The trail narrowed into a section carved into the cliff face, with a sheer drop on one side and rock wall on the other. I pushed harder, my fitness tracker vibrating with warnings about my elevated heart rate. The footsteps stayed constant, never closer, never farther, just there, always there. I glanced back again and felt my stomach drop. His running form was wrong. The joints bent at angles that didn't match human biomechanics. His stride was too long, his movements too fluid, like watching someone run in slightly altered gravity. Panic flooded my system. This wasn't another runner. This was something else, something using the shape of a runner, but getting the details wrong. I could hear his breathing now, and it sounded mechanical, rhythmic, in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. Perfectly timed inhales and exhales, never varying despite the pace changes. I spotted a side trail, an unmarked path that branched off into denser forest. It wasn't on any maps I knew, probably just a deer trail or an old access route. I didn't care. I needed to get away from him, needed to break whatever connection had formed between us. I took the turn without slowing, branches whipping at my face as I plunged into undergrowth that hadn't been maintained for human passage. The side trail was barely visible, choked with ferns and fallen branches. I scrambled over obstacles, my expensive test shoes proving their worth as they gripped on loose rocks and wet logs. Behind me, I heard him follow. No hesitation, no confusion about the sudden direction change. Just those same steady footsteps, crashing through brush that should have slowed anyone down. I risked another glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. He was closer now, maybe 20 yards instead of 30, and I could see his face for the first time. Or rather, I could see the absence of expression. His features were human enough, eyes, nose, mouth, but they didn't move or react. No strain from the difficult terrain, no focus or determination. Just blank animation, like a mask that had never learned to convey emotion. My lungs burned. I'd been running at near sprint pace for too long, through terrain that demanded careful footing, but stopping meant confronting whatever was behind me, and every cell in my body screamed that confrontation would be fatal. I could feel heat radiating from him now, an unnatural warmth that didn't match the cool morning air, and there was a smell, sharp and chemical, like antiseptic or formaldehyde. The trail opened into a small clearing, and I made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing through the forest, I turned sharply and bushwhacked toward where I thought the main trail should be. No path, just crashing through salal and Oregon grape, getting scratched and bleeding but not caring. I could hear him behind me, those impossible joints allowing him to navigate the dense vegetation with ease I couldn't match. My fitness tracker was going haywire, showing heart rate numbers that didn't make sense, GPS coordinates that flickered and jumped. The air felt wrong, thick and resistant like running through water. I stumbled over a root and went down hard, rolling and coming up already running, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. Then I saw it, the parking lot, my truck visible through the trees. I'd somehow looped back faster than should have been possible. I sprinted across the last 100 yards of forest, burst out onto the pavement, and didn't stop until I reached my vehicle. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I looked back. He stood at the tree line, exactly where forest met asphalt, as still as a statue. His head tilted slightly, watching me with that expressionless face. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the parking lot. Then he turned and walked back into the forest. His gait still wrong, still too smooth, his shadow falling in the wrong direction relative to the morning sun. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, shaking, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, I called the ranger station, reported a suspicious person on the trail. They sent someone to check but found nothing. No other vehicles in the lot, no footprints except mine on the muddy trail sections, no sign anyone else had been there that morning. But my fitness tracker told a different story. The data showed my elevated heart rate, the GPS track of my panicked detour through the woods. And there was something else, something the tech support person couldn't explain when I sent them the file. For exactly 17 minutes during my run, the tracker had recorded 2 heart rates simultaneously. Mine, rapid and erratic with fear, and another perfectly steady at 60 beats per minute, never varying even slightly. I pulled the trail camera footage later, after filing an official report. The camera at the trailhead captured me arriving and starting my run. It showed me returning hours later, panicked and bleeding from branch scratches, but it never showed anyone else. The timestamp during my run showed only an empty trail, no other runner, no figure following me, just blank frames of static where he should have been. I haven't run that trail since. Can't bring myself to go back. But sometimes, on other trails, I hear footsteps behind me that match my pace too perfectly. I stop, and they stop. I speed up, and they speed up. But when I look back, there's never anyone there, just empty trail and the lingering scent of something chemical and wrong. My running watch still glitches occasionally, showing that second heart rate in the data. 60 beats per minute, steady and patient, like something is still tracking my workouts, still measuring my pace, still following along from somewhere I can't see. The gear company loved the test data, said the shoes performed exceptionally well under extreme stress conditions. They asked what happened to create such intense readings. I told them it was just a really challenging trail. If you heard footsteps matching yours perfectly in an empty forest, would you look back or would you just keep running? My name is Trevor, and for 9 years I worked as a contract archaeologist, documenting historic sites before they got swallowed by development or forgotten entirely. September 2007 found me deep in Kootenay National Park in British Columbia, surveying the remnants of an abandoned mining camp from the 1890s. The site sat miles from any modern trail, accessible only by bushwhacking through dense forest and crossing 2 streams that probably didn't exist on any map. I was alone, as usual, armed with cameras, measuring tools, and a mandate to document whatever remained before winter erased it completely. The mining camp itself was unremarkable at first glance. Collapsed timber frames, rust-eaten equipment, the skeletal remains of structures that had housed desperate men chasing silver veins through solid rock. I spent 2 days photographing and cataloging, making notes about construction methods and artifact distribution. Standard archaeological work, methodical and slightly tedious. Then I found the cellar. It wasn't marked on any of the historical records I'd reviewed. The mining company's documents showed bunkhouses, an assay office, equipment sheds, but no mention of underground storage. I only discovered it because a rotted plank gave way beneath my boot, revealing a shaft descending into darkness. I rigged a safety line and climbed down with my headlamp, expecting a root cellar or possibly a test shaft the miners had abandoned. What I found was a perfectly preserved Victorian-era room. Not storage. A room, complete with furniture, oil lamps, medical instruments arranged on a wooden table, even clothing hanging from pegs driven into the timber walls. Everything covered in dust but intact, as if the occupant had simply walked away 90 years ago and locked the door behind them. The air smelled wrong. Chloroform, carbolic acid, underlying notes of old decay that made my stomach clench. The medical instruments were surgical. Saws, clamps, needles, scalpels, arranged with disturbing precision. Not the rough field medicine tools you'd expect at a mining camp, but proper surgical equipment, the kind used in operating theaters. I photographed everything, my hand steady despite the growing unease coiling in my gut. This was a significant find, possibly evidence of medical experiments or unauthorized procedures performed far from any oversight. Then I found the journals. 3 leather-bound books stacked beside an ornate writing desk. I opened the first one carefully, mindful of the fragile pages, and started reading by the light of my headlamp. The entries were written in elegant script, dated from July through November 1893, documenting what the author called treatments for miners suffering from mountain sickness. But the descriptions made it clear these weren't treatments. They were torture. Systematic vivisection performed on men who were restrained, conscious, and screaming. The doctor, he never gave his name, just referred to himself as the physician, described his procedures with clinical detachment. How long it took various organs to fail when exposed to high-altitude air, the effects of different chemical compounds on living tissue, the screams his subjects made, which he found musically interesting, enough to document in detailed phonetic notation. Page after page of meticulous horror, all written in handwriting so beautiful it looked like calligraphy. I should have left then, should have sealed the cellar, called the authorities, let someone else deal with the implications of what I'd found. But I kept reading, kept photographing, driven by the same sick compulsion that makes people slow down at accident scenes. The journals documented 23 victims over 4 months. Men who came to the physician complaining of altitude sickness, headaches, breathing troubles. Men who never left his surgery. As I worked, the cellar seemed to grow colder. My breath misted in the beam of my headlamp, even though September in Kootenay rarely brought freezing temperatures. The oil lamps on the table flickered, though they couldn't possibly contain fuel after a century. I told myself it was air currents, drafts from the shaft opening, but I knew better. The room felt occupied, crowded with presence I couldn't see but could absolutely feel pressing against me from all sides. I tried photographing the room again for wider documentation shots. Every image came back wrong. My digital camera, which had worked perfectly all week, now showed only darkness or strange distortions, shapes that looked almost human, but stretched and twisted in ways that hurt to look at. I switched to film, thinking maybe the digital sensor was malfunctioning. The film shots were worse. When I developed them later, they showed the room, yes, but also shadows with substance, darkness that seemed to have texture and movement captured in still frames. That night, back in my tent a half-mile from the site, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cellar, but not as I'd found it. I saw it in use, saw the physician working on restrained men, saw their faces contorted in agony, heard their screams even through the wall of sleep. Except they weren't dreams. They felt like memories, like I was accessing something recorded in that underground space, preserved along with the furniture and instruments. I woke repeatedly with phantom pains, sharp sensations along my ribs as if something had cut into the bone, pressure around my wrists and ankles like restraints, the taste of chemicals, bitter and numbing, flooding my mouth. Each time I jerked awake, gasping, my tent felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the darkness absolute despite my lantern burning. The next morning, I returned to the cellar to collect the journals and document the site closure. The shaft opening was gone, not collapsed, gone. The ground showed no sign of disturbance, no depression where the entrance had been. I spent 2 hours searching, checking my GPS coordinates, my photographs from the previous day, everything. The location was correct, but the cellar had simply ceased to exist in any physical sense I could access. I reported the findings anyway, submitted my photographs and notes, explained what I'd documented. The provincial authorities investigated, brought ground-penetrating radar, excavated the entire area. They found nothing. No shaft, no underground room, no evidence anything had ever been there except the surface ruins. They suggested I'd misidentified a natural depression as an entrance, maybe experienced some carbon monoxide effects from my camping stove. The photographs, they said, were clearly corrupted files, equipment malfunction. But the journals came home with me. I hadn't left them in the cellar. I'd brought them back to my tent that first night, secured them in protective sleeves. Physical evidence that couldn't be explained away. I tried donating them to museums, to historical societies, to university archives. No one would take them. Some said they couldn't authenticate the provenance. Others refused after reading even a single page, handing them back with shaking hands and no explanation. So they sit on my shelf now, 3 leather-bound records of atrocity that shouldn't exist but do. And every few weeks, I receive mail addressed in Victorian script. Letters written in the same elegant handwriting as the journals, describing my daily activities. What I ate for breakfast, the route I drove to work, the conversation I had with my neighbor, all written in the formal language of 1893, as if the physician is still taking notes, still documenting his subjects. The letters arrive in my mailbox with no postage, no return address. The paper is aged, yellowed, but the ink is fresh. I've tried ignoring them, burning them, moving to new addresses. The letters find me. Always have, for 16 years now. And recently, they've started including new entries, procedures he'd like to perform, observations about modern anatomy compared to his Victorian subjects, speculation about how much I might scream. I don't work in archaeology anymore, can't bring myself to dig into the past when the past has shown such interest in digging into me. Would you keep evidence of evil if it meant evil kept watching you forever? My name is Josephine, and I've spent the last 12 years as a professional wildlife photographer. I travel constantly, chasing assignments that take me to places most people never see. In November 2020, I was working in Washington's Olympic National Forest, specifically the Hoh Rainforest region, on assignment to photograph Roosevelt elk during their rut season. The magazine wanted dramatic shots, bulls clashing, the raw power of nature, that sort of thing. What I captured on camera that week defied every biological category I knew. I'd set up base camp deep in the rainforest, where moss hangs so thick it muffles sound, and the canopy filters light into an eternal green twilight. The first few days went smoothly. I positioned game cameras in a grid pattern around my campsite, each one motion activated and programmed to capture both still images and video. At night, I'd review the footage, looking for patterns in elk movement, identifying individual animals, planning my shooting locations for optimal light. On the 4th night, one of my cameras triggered repeatedly between 2 and 4 in the morning. 17 separate activations, which seemed excessive for normal animal traffic. I loaded the memory card expecting deer or maybe a black bear investigating the equipment. Instead, I found something that made my hands go cold despite the insulated tent. A figure. Humanoid but wrong in fundamental ways. The images showed it circling my camp at varying distances, sometimes close enough that the camera flash illuminated details I wish I'd never seen. It stood somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall, covered in matted hair or fur that hung in wet clumps. But the proportions were off. Arms too long, torso too narrow, legs that bent slightly backward at what should have been the knee. And the face. God, the face. In the clearest shots, taken when it approached within 10 feet of the camera, I could see features that mixed human and animal in a way that violated every instinct about what faces should look like. The eyes were too large, positioned slightly too far apart, with a reflective quality that made them glow green in the camera flash. The mouth opened in several frames, revealing teeth that looked human-sized, but arranged in rows like a shark's. And there was something about the expression, something that suggested intelligence and awareness, that made my skin crawl worse than if it had been purely animal. I sat in my tent, laptop open, scrolling through image after image of this thing stalking around my camp while I slept. The timestamp showed it had been there for nearly 2 hours, moving with a patience that felt deliberate. In some shots, it appeared to be examining my equipment. In others, it stood motionless, facing directly toward my tent, as if it could see through the nylon walls to where I lay sleeping. The smart thing would have been to pack up immediately and hike out. But I'm not smart when it comes to photography. I'm obsessive. And some part of me, the part that's driven my entire career, saw these images and thought, documentation, evidence, proof of something unknown. I set up additional cameras, creating a tighter perimeter, positioning them to capture overlapping fields of view. If this thing returned, I'd get better footage, multiple angles, irrefutable documentation. It came back the next night, all 12 cameras triggered at various points between midnight and dawn. The footage was extensive, showing the creature's full circuit around my camp. It moved through the rainforest with impossible silence for something so large, navigating the dense undergrowth without creating any of the noise elk or bears make. And it displayed behavior that chilled me more than its appearance, curiosity. It investigated my cameras, turning its head to examine them from different angles without touching them. It approached my tent multiple times, standing close enough that I could hear breathing in my sleep, though I didn't realize what that sound was until I reviewed the footage. The videos showed something the still images hadn't captured. When it breathed, vapor emerged from its mouth and nose, normal enough in the cold November air. But the vapor was wrong. Too thick, too persistent, hanging in the air longer than physics should allow. And the sound, the audio track picked up breathing that sounded almost like speech, like it was trying to form words with a throat not designed for human language. On the third night, I stayed awake. Sat in my tent with my best camera, a telephoto lens capable of shooting in near darkness, and waited. Around 1 in the morning, I heard it. Movement outside so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been listening intently. I unzipped my tent slowly, inch by inch, praying the sound wouldn't alert it. It stood 30 feet away, partially obscured by a massive Sitka spruce. Even in the darkness, I could make out its silhouette, that impossible height, those wrong proportions. I raised my camera and started shooting, the shutter clicks sounding deafeningly loud in the silent forest. It turned toward me, made eye contact across that distance, and I swear I saw recognition in those reflective eyes, not the blank awareness of an animal noticing a threat. Recognition, like it knew exactly what I was doing, and found it interesting. It stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight filtering through the canopy. I kept shooting, capturing frame after frame, professional instinct overriding terror. It was wearing something, remnants of clothing, a tattered jacket, pieces of what might have been hiking boots integrated into its feet like the leather had fused with flesh. And around its neck hung a laminated tag, the kind that identifies trail permits or wilderness passes. I zoomed in, focusing on the tag. Through my viewfinder, I could just make out text. A name, a date from 1997. This thing had been a person, a hiker who'd entered these woods 23 years ago and somehow transformed into whatever stood before me now. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an unknown species. This was metamorphosis, some process that took humans and reshaped them into these creatures, keeping them aware enough to retain traces of their former identity, but changing them fundamentally. The intelligence I saw wasn't animal cunning. It was human consciousness trapped in a body that had mutated beyond recognition. It watched me for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it did something that confirmed my worst fears. It mimicked me, raised its elongated arms in an approximation of my posture, tilted its head the way I tilt mine when composing a shot. It was showing me it understood, showing me it remembered how to be human even though it no longer was. Then it left, turned, and moved into the forest with that unnatural silence, disappearing so completely it might have been a hallucination. Except I had the photographs, hundreds of them, clear, well-exposed, professionally composed shots of something that shouldn't exist. I packed up that night, didn't wait for dawn, hiked out using a headlamp, constantly checking behind me, certain I'd feel those long arms reaching out of the darkness. The photographs caused a firestorm when I tried to share them. Wildlife biology professors, cryptozoologists, skeptics, believers. Everyone had opinions. Most were convinced they were fakes, clever digital manipulations. Some believed they showed an undiscovered primate species. A few suggested bear with mange or some other conventional explanation, but the experts who examined the images, really studied them, found no evidence of manipulation. The metadata was intact, showing my camera's settings, GPS coordinates, timestamps. The lighting and shadows were consistent. Whatever the images showed, they were genuine photographs of something that had been there. But here's what I didn't tell anyone. After I got home, I started receiving photos myself, images appearing on my camera's memory cards that I didn't shoot, pictures taken from angles that would have required my camera to be positioned in places it never was, and the subjects of these photographs, me, in my home, sleeping, working at my computer, showering. Someone or something had been photographing me the way I'd photographed it. The images continue to appear, not frequently, maybe once a month. Always on memory cards I'm actively using, appearing between shots I remember taking. And recently, the photographs have started showing me in locations I haven't visited yet. Places I'll be next week, next month, captured from angles that suggest the photographer is waiting for me to arrive. I still work in wildlife photography, but I avoid the Pacific Northwest now. Can't bring myself to return to those forests, where the boundary between human and animal blurs in ways nature never intended. Because I understand now, it wasn't stalking me that week. It was studying me, learning me, the same way I study the subjects I photograph, documenting their behavior, predicting their patterns, waiting for the perfect shot. If something photographed you every day without your knowledge, documenting your life like you were a specimen, would you even notice before it was too late? My name is Rain, and for the past 7 years, I've worked as a cell tower maintenance technician across Oregon. Most days, it's a blend of routine repairs and remote troubleshooting, but in June 2016, I drew an assignment that still makes my skin crawl whenever I see an old steel lattice on the horizon. I'd been sent to a tower near Crater Lake, one of the most isolated locations our company serviced. The call reported signal disruptions and equipment overheating, but what I found there gave me answers I never wanted. The road to the site was barely more than a logging track, carved into thick stands of Douglas fir that crowd the world with their high canopies and dense, shadowy silence. The day was bright and humid. Sweat trickled down my back before I even finished the first system check. I always begin with the base equipment, then work my way to the tower head. Routine, methodical. But that day, every step felt watched, in a rational sense, but one that pressed around the edges of my attention as I unlocked the control shed and started diagnostics. Within minutes, I realized the tower was brokering unknown traffic. The spectrum analyzers spiked again and again with frequencies outside our assigned range. Low, dense bands that overlapped with neither police, weather, nor aviation. The signals formed repeating geometric shapes on the monitor, crisp enough that I first thought they were a system glitch. But my gear was new, calibrated only 3 days prior. When I plugged in my audio taps, I captured something even stranger. Waves of static punctuated by what sounded like voices, garbled and reversed, too quick for human speech. Curiosity overtook procedure. I piped the signal through my field laptop, isolated a segment, and reversed it. The result was chilling. It wasn't random interference. It was a clear message, in English, but flat, toneless, as if spoken by software. Observer Rain, remain on site. Your presence is required. My name spoken in that dead mechanical tone, repeated until the speaker degraded into digital shrieking. I tried calling the base. My phone displayed bars, but the call wouldn't connect, and a click echoed in my ear like someone had picked up and silently waited. An ozone tang flooded the shed. The farther I dug, the worse it got. Equipment overheating despite the fans running, electrical fields prickling the hair along my arms, static so strong it made my jaw ache, and my fillings buzz. A brick of backup batteries burst with a chemical stink, leaking fluid onto the metal floor. In the suffocating heat, I climbed the tower, looking for any sort of physical sabotage. There was none. The higher I got, the clearer the air became, and the view snapped into impossible clarity. The forest below looked distorted, as if every tree were perfectly replicated, but just off in shape, limbs twisting into patterns that resolved only in my peripheral vision. Up there, I heard the clicks and warbles of the unknown, frequency, broadcasting directly through the structure itself, every joint and rivet droning with a language older than the equipment. On a hunch, I tuned my personal field radio to one of the clean static bands and listened. Out of the crackle came fragmented sentences describing everything I was doing: climbing, recording, adjusting harness, looking down, hands shaking. Each action narrated in real time, as if I was being tracked not only by sight, but by my own intent. When I reached the platform, my vision blurred, and every surface felt hot. The metal thrummed under my boots. Sweat coated my skin, but my mouth tasted metallic, like biting a handful of pennies. I pressed my gloved hand to the mast, and the sensation jolted through me. Pressure, heat, and, worse than all, the thin, clear impression of being talked through. My thoughts began echoing back to me, not in my own inner voice, but twisted, sampled, then played back, out of sync. Observer Rain, adjust harness, be careful not to fall, remain, remain. I replaced the tower head relay mostly on autopilot. When I powered the system back up, the unknown broadcast stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy, unnatural, as if the woods surrounding me were waiting for a cue. I descended as fast as I dared. By the time I hit the ground, the signal had vanished. Vehicles and planes on every other frequency returned to normal. As I closed up the shed, I found a slip of paper tucked behind the main console, a maintenance log signed with my name, dated 2 days in the future, with a list of tasks I'd barely started. The handwriting was mine, tool-smudged and precise. After that job, nothing was the same. For months, I would wake up to texts from unknown numbers, containing only strings of numbers and timestamps that matched system logs from the tower. A few times, my own phone sent calls to itself, leaving voicemails of clicks, static, and once my own voice describing what I was doing in my apartment hours after the call was made. I never spoke about it to anyone at work. Who would believe it? But the next season, the company decommissioned that entire site, shipping the tower away in pieces. To this day, I sometimes pick up signals on old radios, geometry and static, brief snatches of my own voice trailing after new interference, and always the low digital hum that sets the fillings in my teeth buzzing. So, let me ask you, if you found a signal on your phone or radio that described everything you did in real time, would you listen to what it told you, or do everything you could to shut it out. My name is Iris, and I've been backpacking solo through wilderness areas for most of my adult life. I work as a wilderness therapy counselor, which means I'm constantly navigating backcountry trails and teaching survival skills to groups of teenagers. In April 2002, I was hiking through Idaho's Sawtooth National Forest near Alice Lake when I took what I thought was a simple detour around a washout. That decision led me into a place that shouldn't exist, where time bent in ways my compass couldn't measure and my watch refused to acknowledge. The washout had blocked the main trail with a tangle of mud and fallen trees from spring runoff. Rather than backtrack 3 miles, I consulted my topographic map and spotted what looked like a natural passage through a drainage valley that would reconnect me with the trail on the other side. The map showed standard contour lines, normal elevation changes, nothing unusual. I marked my position with my GPS unit, shouldered my pack, and bushwhacked into terrain that felt immediately different. The forest changed within 50 yards. Not dramatically, not in any way I could articulate at first, just a subtle shift in atmosphere that made my skin prickle. The light took on a strange quality, filtering through the canopy at angles that didn't correspond to the afternoon sun's actual position. Shadows pooled in places they shouldn't, while other areas blazed with brightness that seemed sourceless. I checked my compass repeatedly. It showed I was heading east, which was correct, but something about the direction felt wrong, like my internal sense of orientation had detached from the physical reality. The valley opened into a meadow I hadn't seen on any map. It was beautiful in an unsettling way, carpeted with wildflowers that shouldn't have been blooming together. Spring crocuses mixed with summer lupine, autumn asters growing alongside plants I didn't recognize at all. The air smelled of pine and rain and wildflowers and wood smoke simultaneously. A bouquet of scents that shouldn't coexist, but somehow blended into something almost narcotic in its richness. At the meadow's center stood evidence of human presence, a campsite, but wrong. Multiple tents from different eras clustered around a fire ring. I recognized a canvas wall tent like the kind used in the 1960s, a dome tent from maybe the 1990s, and a modern ultralight backpacking shelter I'd seen in catalogs last year. All of them looked occupied, sleeping bags visible through open flaps, gear scattered around, food hanging from bare cables strung between trees. But no people, no sound of voices or movement. Fresh coffee sat in a percolator on the fire's coals, steam rising in lazy spirals. I could hear it bubbling gently, smell the rich aroma cutting through the meadow's complex perfume. I called out, identified myself as a hiker, asked if anyone needed assistance. My voice fell flat, absorbed by the air as if the meadow swallowed sound. No echo, no response, just the coffee percolating and the absolute silence of a place holding its breath. I approached the fire carefully. The flames burned without crackling, consuming wood that never seemed to diminish. Around the ring, personal items lay scattered. A paperback novel from 1967, a digital camera from 2001, a smartphone that looked brand new. I picked up the phone, its screen showing a date, April 18, 2015. 13 years in my future. The battery indicator read full, and the background image showed a family I didn't recognize, smiling at a birthday party that hadn't happened yet. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Someone's idea of an art installation, maybe. An elaborate prank, but we were miles from any road, in terrain that required serious hiking skills to access, and the meadow itself felt fundamentally wrong in ways I couldn't name. Time moved strangely. When I checked my watch, only 3 minutes had passed since I entered the clearing, but the sun hadn't moved at all. It hung at the same angle, casting identical shadows, as if the world had paused while I stumbled through its frozen moment. I tried leaving, picked a direction, any direction away from the campsite and walked with purpose toward what should have been the tree line. 10 minutes of hiking brought me back to the meadow center, approaching the fire ring from a different angle, but arriving nonetheless. I tried again, using my compass, following it precisely northeast. Same result. The meadow curled back on itself. Or I did. Or space itself bent in ways that made navigation meaningless. Panic rose in my throat, metallic and sharp. I forced it down, falling back on wilderness training. When lost, stay put. Make yourself visible. Wait for rescue. Except, I wasn't lost in any conventional sense. I was trapped in a place that operated by rules I didn't understand. The sun refused to move. My watch ticked forward, but the light stayed constant. That perfect late afternoon glow that should have shifted into evening but never did. I made camp near the fire ring, too unnerved to touch the other tents or their contents. As darkness failed to fall, I sat awake, watching the unchanging meadow and trying to understand what was happening. The air tasted of every season at once. Spring rain, summer heat, autumn smoke, winter cold, all present simultaneously in a way that should have been impossible, but felt almost natural once I stopped fighting it. Sometime during what should have been night, but remained perpetual afternoon, I fell asleep from pure exhaustion. When I woke, I was lying on wet ground outside the valley, my pack beside me, my compass reading north again, like it knew where that was. The sun sat low on the horizon, actually moving now, dipping toward evening in normal progression. My GPS showed I'd moved 7 miles from my last recorded position, but my watch indicated only 20 minutes had passed. I hiked out in a daze, reaching the trailhead just as actual. Darkness fell. Later, when I checked my gear, I found items I hadn't packed. A paper map of the Sawtooth Wilderness dated 1975, a digital photograph printed on glossy paper showing the meadow from an angle I'd never stood at, with my own figure visible in the background, blurred but recognizable, and a note, handwritten on paper that felt ancient, that read, "You slept for 7 hours. Outside 20 minutes. Be grateful for the exchange rate. Some aren't so lucky." I tried finding the valley again, returned 3 times over the next year, searching for the washout, the drainage, any landmark that might lead me back. The terrain looked completely different each time, or maybe I couldn't recognize it anymore. My internal map of that area had fractured, leaving me unable to trust my memory or my navigation skills. But occasionally, while hiking other trails in other wilderness areas, I catch glimpses of it. Just at the corner of my vision, a meadow with wrong light and impossible flowers, a campsite that shouldn't exist. It's always just out of reach, just beyond where I'm actually walking. And sometimes, when I look at my watch during those moments, the second hand pauses, just for a breath, just long enough to remind me that I found a place where time bent, and it hasn't let me go completely. The worst part isn't the fear or the confusion, it's the longing. Because part of me, a part I don't like to acknowledge, wants to find that meadow again, wants to step into that eternal afternoon where seasons blur and time moves at different speeds. Some days, I worry that desire is growing stronger, pulling me toward trails I've never mapped, valleys that exist only in the spaces between my heartbeats. If you found a place where time stopped, would you have the strength to leave it behind, or would you keep searching until you disappeared into it completely? That's the final story from the Pacific Northwest wilderness. 8 true accounts of people who ventured into ancient forests and mountains, only to encounter something beyond explanation. From cosmic anomalies beneath the earth to valleys where time itself bends, these survivors carry memories that refuse to fade. If these stories disturbed you, hit that like button and subscribe to Black Fears for more real horror. Until next time, stay safe out there.